The developers cashing in on the Carolinas do not want you to see this video because these 12 towns are growing so fast. The roads, the schools, and the water systems are cracking under the strain, and in a few of them, a house that sold for $100,000 a decade ago will now cost you $500,000. See, there's a version of the Carolina boom nobody puts in the glossy relocation brochure. The traffic that turns a 5-minute drive into 40. The schools so packed they're teaching in trailers. The farmland that vanished under a subdivision while nobody was looking. Both Carolinas now rank among the fastest growing states in America, with South Carolina recently posting the single highest growth rate of any state. That kind of growth builds fortunes for developers. It also breaks towns. I found a sleepy oyster village that has exploded by more than 800%. A historic little town whose own residents are packing council meetings, begging their leaders to stop the bulldozers. A farm town east of Raleigh that doubled in size in 5 short years. And one boomtown that had to slam on the brakes twice in a single year just to catch its breath. If you're thinking about moving to the Carolinas, you need to see this first. So hit that subscribe button now because we're counting all 12 of these down, and you do not want to miss number 1. Let's count it down. Number 12, Zebulon, North Carolina. When I first drove into Zebulon, a tiny town sitting where 2 highways cross east of Raleigh, it still looked like the quiet farming community it's always been. The paperwork tells a very different story. Here's the wildcard fact. Since the 2020 census, Zebulon's population has jumped by more than 70%, one of the very fastest growth rates in the entire state, as builders priced out of inner Raleigh raced east looking for open land, and found it here. That's the pattern you'll see again and again on this list. The growth doesn't start in these towns. It spills into them, from a bigger city next door that ran out of room. For a buyer, that means Zebulon is a place to get in early, while it's still cheap, but for the people who've lived here for generations, it means watching the fields they grew up around turn into cul-de-sacs almost overnight. Small town, big city overflow, and a countdown that only gets more extreme from here. Number 11, Greer, South Carolina. When I first drove into Greer, wedged into the upstate right between Greenville and Spartanburg, I expected a quiet mill town. Instead, I hit traffic. Here's the wildcard fact. Greer recently became the single fastest growing city in all of South Carolina, its population spiking past 50,000 people, supercharged by the massive BMW plant nearby and the busy international airport that sits right on its doorstep. Jobs pulled people in by the thousands, and the housing scrambled to keep up. That's the upstate boom in a nutshell, manufacturing money meeting cheap land and exploding. The upside is real. Good jobs, a revived downtown, genuine momentum. But the strain is real too, as 2-lane country roads that were never built for this kind of volume now crawl at rush hour. Greer is proof that you do not need a beach or a big skyline to blow up. You just need jobs and room to build. And Greer is running low on the second one. Number 10, Apex, North Carolina. When I first drove into Apex, its old railroad downtown still had that peak of good living charm the town literally puts on its water tower. Then I tried to leave at 5 o'clock. Here's the wildcard fact. Apex has spent years ranked among the fastest growing towns in the entire United States, ballooning from a small railroad village into a suburb of tens of thousands, as the Research Triangle's tech and pharmaceutical boom sent families hunting for a little more space and a little more yard. And they found it in Apex, right up until everyone else did too. That's the cruel math of a boomtown. The very things that make it wonderful, the space and the schools and the small town feel, are the exact things that vanish when 100,000 other people want them too. Apex still tops best places to live lists every year. But talk to anyone stuck on its clogged main roads at rush hour, and they'll tell you the peak of good living now comes with a peak of traffic. Number 9, Moncks Corner, South Carolina. When I first drove into Moncks Corner, up the Cooper River from Charleston, it felt like classic small-town low country. The developments on its edges tell you where it's headed. Here's the wildcard fact. Moncks Corner has more than doubled in size, and it sits at the leading edge of one of the most explosive suburban surges in the whole state, with enormous master-planned communities rising out of the pine forest nearby, entire towns worth of houses, schools, and shopping built essentially from scratch as Charleston's growth pushes relentlessly inland. That's the story of the entire Charleston region right now. The city itself is full and expensive, so the boom leapfrogs up the highways into places like this. For a buyer, there's real value here, and brand new everything. But the roads connecting these giant new neighborhoods to the jobs back in Charleston are groaning, and the daily commute is the price of admission. Cheap land, instant neighborhoods, and a highway system racing to catch up. Number 8. Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina. When I first drove into Fuquay-Varina, its quirky 2-in-1 downtown still felt like a genuine small town with a great name. Then I saw the construction in every direction. Here's the wildcard fact. Fuquay-Varina has been one of the fastest growing towns in North Carolina for years now, its population swelling as families spill south out of Raleigh and Cary chasing homes they can actually afford. And the town's charming, narrow old street grid was never, ever designed to move this many cars. That's the choke point. You can build houses fast, but you cannot widen a historic downtown overnight, so all that new traffic funnels through roads built for a town a fraction of this size. It's a great place to live, with a real community and homes that still cost less than the closer-in suburbs. But that affordability is exactly what's drawing the crowd, and the crowd is exactly what's clogging the roads. Get in for the value. Just know what you're driving into. Number 7. Leland, North Carolina. When I first drove into Leland, just across the river from Wilmington, I could barely tell where the old crossroads ended and the new subdivisions began. That's because there's almost nothing old left to see. Here's the wildcard fact. Leland sits in Brunswick County, one of the fastest growing counties in the entire state, which has ballooned by more than a quarter in a single decade, and Leland is its engine, transforming from a rural highway junction into a sprawling suburb of Wilmington almost entirely within the last 20 years. This is coastal growth doing what coastal growth does, chasing cheap land near the water and the beaches. The catch is that nearly everything funnels onto US Highway 17, the main highway through town, which now backs up for miles during season and rush hour. Leland gives you beach access, new construction, and Wilmington next door. It just makes you sit in traffic to enjoy all three. If you're learning things about the Carolinas you never expected, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people just like you. Number 6. Hardeeville, South Carolina. When I first drove into Hardeeville, down in the far southern tip of the state, I could feel that this wasn't a town settling in. It was a town erupting. Here's the wildcard fact. Hardeeville is now the single fastest growing city in South Carolina by percentage, expanding at nearly 10% every single year, as it sops up the overflow from booming Savannah just over the Georgia line and pricey Hilton Head just up the coast. Whole master-planned communities, including a giant retirement development, are rising out of the low-country pines. This is a boom being built from zero on open land at breakneck speed. And that's both the appeal and the warning. You get brand new everything and a ground floor price, but you're also buying into a place that is quite literally being invented around you in real time, where the roads, the schools, and the shops are all racing to catch up to the rooftops. Get in early enough, and you ride the wave. Get in blind, and you live in a construction zone. Number 5. Wendell, North Carolina. When I first drove into Wendell, another small town east of Raleigh, half of it looked 100 years old and the other half looked 100 days old. Here's the wildcard fact. Wendell has essentially doubled its entire population since 2020, recently posting the single highest growth rate of any town in North Carolina, and almost all of it traces back to one thing: a massive 1,500-acre planned development called Wendell Falls that dropped thousands of new homes onto what used to be farmland. That's the teaser I promised you. The farm town that doubled in 5 years. One development, and the whole town changed. It brought shops, restaurants, and life that a small town could only dream of. It also brought a tidal wave of new neighbors to a place that, just a few years ago, was a quiet dot on the map east of the city. Wendell is what happens when big city developers decide a sleepy farm town is next. Blink, and it's a suburb. Number 4. Indian Land, South Carolina. When I first drove into Indian Land, in the panhandle of Lancaster County right on the Charlotte border, I kept waiting to reach the town center. There isn't one. Here's the wildcard fact. Indian Land is one of the most explosive growth stories in the entire region, and it is not even an incorporated town, meaning there is no city hall, no mayor, and for years, very little local power to control the flood of development pouring in from Charlotte just across the state line. The result is miles of new subdivisions and strip malls strung along a single highway, US Highway 521, which now jams up so badly that road-widening projects are chasing the growth instead of leading it. That's the nightmare version of a boom, growth with almost no brakes. It got so bad that the county finally slapped a temporary moratorium on new development just to catch up. Cheap Carolina taxes, a straight shot to Charlotte's biggest job centers and no town government to say no. It is a developer's dream, and increasingly, a commuter's headache. Number 3. Waxhaw, North Carolina. This is the one where the residents are actively begging their leaders to stop. When I first drove into Waxhaw, its beautifully preserved historic downtown looked like something off a postcard. Then I learned how hard the people here are fighting to keep it that way. Here's the wildcard fact. Waxhaw, a small historic town in Union County southeast of Charlotte, has been swamped by the metro's outward march, and its residents have become some of the most vocal anti-sprawl voices in the state, packing town meetings, pushing back on rezonings, and fighting to slow the bulldozers before the two-lane roads and the small-town character disappear for good. This is the emotional heart of the whole growth fight. It's the moment a community looks around and says, wait, we're losing the exact thing that made everyone want to move here. Waxhaw still has its charm, its downtown, and its churches and its trees. But the traffic on its old country roads is brutal, and the town is locked in a genuine tug-of-war over its own future. Grow or stay itself. It can't fully do both. Number 2, Bluffton, South Carolina. And number 2 is a place you'd never, ever expect to be a runaway boomtown. When I first drove into Old Town Bluffton with its ancient oaks and oyster shacks along the quiet May River, it felt frozen in a gentler century. The numbers around it are absolutely staggering. Here's the wildcard fact. Bluffton, a town that had well under 1,000 residents just a couple of decades ago, has exploded by more than 800%, ballooning into one of the largest and fastest growing towns in the entire state, a sleepy low-country village swallowed almost whole by the retirement and vacation boom radiating out from neighboring Hilton Head Island. That's the teaser I opened with, the oyster village up 800%, and the strain is right there on the surface. The main highway into town chokes with traffic in season. Sprawling gated communities now stretch for miles inland from that historic riverfront, and the tiny original village survives as a beautiful island in a sea of new development. Bluffton pulled off something rare and a little bittersweet. It kept its gorgeous old heart, even as it grew a brand new body 10 times the size. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who does their homework before they move. So do yourself a favor and hit that like button, then let's get to number 1. Number 1, Fort Mill, South Carolina. And honestly, no town on this list captures the whole story quite like this one. When I first drove into Fort Mill, just across the state line from Charlotte, I saw a picture-perfect southern Main Street, and then, in every direction around it, a wall of cranes, rooftops, and fresh asphalt. Here's the wildcard fact. Fort Mill's population has more than tripled in a single decade, one of the fastest booms anywhere in the country, as families poured across the border chasing Charlotte's jobs, South Carolina's lower taxes, and a school district ranked the very best in the entire state. And the growth got so overwhelming so fast that the town did something almost unheard of. It slammed on the brakes, twice in a single year, enacting temporary moratoriums that froze new residential development while it scrambled to update its own plans and catch its infrastructure up to the flood. That's the teaser I opened this whole video with, the boomtown that had to stop building to breathe. The mayor herself described it perfectly, saying the town had been, in her words, drinking water out of a fire hose. Think about what that actually takes. A town so swamped by its own success that it had to legally pause the thing everyone said it wanted, growth itself. Fort Mill now charges some of the highest school building fees in the whole region, grades new projects on how much traffic they'll cause, and rejects the worst offenders, and fights every single day to keep its charming old downtown from being buried under the boom. The best school district in the state is bursting at the seams. Home prices have rocketed toward $500,000, and the roads that were quiet country lanes a decade ago now sit bumper to bumper. That is why Fort Mill is number 1. Not because it's the biggest or even the fastest by percentage. Smaller towns on this list grew quicker, but because Fort Mill is the clearest picture of what happens when a wonderful place gets discovered all at once. The schools that everyone moved for, packed. The small town feel that everyone wanted, strained. And a local government forced to choose between welcoming the world and saving what made it special. It is the boom and the backlash, happening in the very same town at the very same time. And out of all 12, it's the one to watch to see how this whole Carolina story ends. Every town on this list is caught in the exact same trap. The very things that make the Carolinas irresistible, the jobs, the space, the low taxes, the charm, the coast, the mountains, are the things that draw the crowds. And the crowds are the things that put every one of those qualities at risk. Growth isn't a villain, and none of these are bad places to live. Far from it, they're booming precisely because they're wonderful. But there's a real cost to being the place everyone suddenly wants, and it shows up in the traffic you sit in, the school your kid is bused across town to, the farm that became a subdivision, and the price tag on a house that doubled while you were still deciding. So if you're chasing the Carolina dream, chase it with your eyes open. Get in early, know the trade-offs, and understand exactly what you're buying into. Because the boom is real, the opportunity is real, and so is the strain. So if this video changed how you see the Carolina boom, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me which of these towns you'd still move to anyway. I read every single one. And if this video hits 15,000 likes, I'll do a part 2 with 12 more towns growing faster than anyone can control. I'll see you in the next.